Welcome to episode 158 of the CUInsight Experience. I'm Randy Smith, one of the co-founders of CUInsight.com, and this show is all about taking a deep dive with the leaders of the credit union movement who make it so great. This episode is brought to you by CUIs, the credit union industry's leading talent development solutions provider. After listening to our show today, learn more and register for CEO Dialogue by visiting CUIs.org to join your fellow CEOs in an open discussion tackling the industry's most pressing issues. That sounds timely and very cool. Today, I am having a conversation with Kent Lugrand. Kent is the president and CEO of InTouch Credit Union in Texas. And with that, let's jump right in. Welcome to the show, Kent.
Thank you very much, Randy. It's great to be here.
I will tell you, I always love to start with the background question, just to give everybody the, idea of where you came from and how you got to credit unions. And, as I mentioned before we hit record, doing a little homework, besides the minor league baseball that you played, which is awesome in its own, as somebody else who grew up wanting to be a professional athlete, it just didn't even come close to happening for me. But we share a similar career start out of college. So where'd you start your career and how did that lead you to credit unions?
Well, I started my career, I guess you could officially say I started my career working for Merrill Lynch in Kansas City. I'm originally a Midwest kid, and I did have some other starts prior to that. I did work in banking for a while. I worked in hospitality for a little while, things of that nature. But I started my career with Merrill in Kansas City and was really good at it. I just loved it. In fact, back then in the early 80s, being in banking and being in finance was very sexy at the time.
Yes.
That is no longer the case today, but it was then. And so I absolutely loved it, but I reached a point where it wasn't fulfilling, and that had to do with some emotional maturity and experience on my part and what I wanted to do with my life and my career. And one of my best friends was working at U.S. Central Credit Union and said, Kent, we could use guys like you. And I went on an interview and they hired me. And I only worked at that credit union for not quite a year because it was a corporate credit union, and it exposed me to natural person credit unions. And when I was exposed to natural person credit unions, you had the parting of the clouds and the sun and everything. And I realized that is the spot for me.
The rest is history. I just have to say, I, out of college, went, directly to it was Dean Witter, but then Morgan Stanley in the late 90s. And I heard from the guys that the early 80s were quite the experience.
They were. I like to tell everyone that when I started my career, when I was hired by Merrill in the fall of 1982, the Dow Jones Industrial Average was 967.
That is amazing. Yep, that's for sure. So do you remember, you said a friend said, hey, we could use a guy like you at the credit union. Do you remember the first time you heard of a credit union? If you're from the Midwest, I'm a Detroit guy. Everybody thought you had to belong to a union. But when did you find out about credit unions?
Well, believe it or not, that was the first time, but it did trigger a memory because I had just kind of like put credit unions out of my brain until I met him. But once I was hired and got really involved in credit union, it triggered a memory back when I was a kid that my parents were members of a local credit union in Wichita. And my dad ended up getting a small loan to not only buy Christmas stuff, but help him start his business. And I had forgotten all about that until I had that opportunity.
And that is an amazing story, and one that we hear so often in credit unions, right? Like we don't even know it. I was excited to talk to you about credit unions, overall, broadly, what we're seeing out there. When you're in your position, what are you seeing as the biggest challenges that credit unions are facing today, 2023, as we look forward?
I think the biggest challenge facing credit unions is not because of what's happening with credit unions, it's because of what's happening with society.
Okay.
What's happening with society is smartphones. And access and information and digital delivery and Amazon and everything else. And that technology is forcing banking change, behavior change, economic change. And so that's what's driving, that's what's kind of like the core source behind what is going on with credit unions. And I think that will be, I think it's true today. I think it will be more true 3 years from now and 5 years from now.
I couldn't agree with you more. You brought up Amazon. It's like if we can't get it the same day or next day, we're like, oh, we better find a different place now. So our expectation of instant gratification has sure went through the roof the last few years.
Well, it's not only that, but people's behavior changed. I remember having a staff meeting because I had a friend who was with Bed Bath & Beyond. And, who knows how long they will be in existence. And he was telling me his struggle in his particular store, in that customers would come in and they would touch it, feel it, try it, decide on what they want. And then inside the store, they would pull up their smartphone, look it up on Amazon. They'd even scan the QR code, look it up and see if they could find it cheaper. And if they could find it cheaper, they would buy it right there in the store and then just leave. And I that thought was like new to me. And I remember having a staff meeting with all my managers saying, who would do that? Would any of you guys do that? How many of you guys would do that? And virtually every single one raised their hand.
I've been guilty of that at a Barnes and Noble before. So where it was like, oh, I can get this tomorrow from you.
Then it's that kind of instant information is changing financial services.
That's something I feel like in the past we talked a lot about. I mean, I used to give the example of the last few times any of us have probably bought a car. We already knew everything about the car before we walked in to get it and knew where we were going to buy it from and the price, right? Like we have, like you said, so much information out there that it's unbelievable. I wanted to make sure I get this in here early because I can't wait to hear more about this. But like I said, when I was doing a little bit of homework, I stumbled across an interview you gave, I think it was last summer, and you talked about the program at In Touch that you started to deal with food insecurity in the communities that you serve. I could probably do a whole show on this. I think that is just absolutely amazing. But the questions I had for you is, could you give us an update that since I read that article, it was a year or so, or that interview a year or so later, but also even more like, where did the motivation come? That's such a huge problem in so many communities today. Where did the motivation come to say, okay, we're going all in on this at the credit union?
Okay, well, the motivation came, credit unions by design are community institutions. Part of our way of being is to be an integral part of the community, not only from a financial perspective, but a solution perspective, right? To make sure that we are not part of the problem, but we come up with ways to make things better. And there are so many different needs. I think the year before or the year before that, I won't say tricked, I was persuaded to don a pink wig for Komen. And I did, and I was fortunate. We ended up raising like $30,000 for breast cancer. And throughout that experience, one of the things that amazed me was how many people it affected. And so my wife, my admin, they would say, just ask. And so I could not find a single person that didn't have a wife, a mother, a sister, a college roommate, a cousin, or something that wasn't affected by breast cancer. Yeah, and so it kind of opened us up to, there are all of these different kind of needs, whether it be Children's Miracle Network or Toys for Tots or something. And we get asked all the time, can you help us? And so I thought it was too big of a question to ask just for me. And so I posed the question to my staff. I said, okay, if there were, and I gave them a limit. I said, if there were 3 things that we could do that could not only make a difference, but you could be proud of, that you would be proud for your community to see that InTouch logo on your shirt, knowing that you work for an organization that made a difference and that stood for something. If you could choose just 3 things, what would it be? Surprising to me, and I think it has something to do with the pandemic and the lines that we were seeing at the time, but food insecurity was not only number 1 on the list, it was like 65%, but it was in the top 3, either 1, 2, or 3 on over 92% of the staff's list.
It sounds like you have pretty good staff there, a good, pretty compassionate staff.
This is it. This is what we're going to do. This is what we're going to get behind. And so, but we know that we're just a small organization and we can't do this by ourselves. So we decided to partner with our members, and we encouraged our members, and we created an opportunity for them to participate as well, because it does take a village, right? And so we said, I tell you what, for everyone that does business with us, a portion of your loan payment, a portion of a swipe, or a portion of whatever, we will take a portion of that and put it aside and donate it to food banks in our 3 major markets. And last year, we raised $150,000 first year.
Amazing. That is awesome.
And the food banks were just thrilled. And so we plan on hopefully doing even more this year and getting more of our communities involved. But we've decided that we're not going to stop until we hit at least $1 million, and then we're going to go from there.
That is awesome. Well, congratulations to you and your team. What an amazing program.
That's how that came into fruition.
I love that. When I saw that, I'm like, I need to ask about that. So I'd like to ask you, we kind of went to what the challenges are for credit unions. On the flip side, what has you excited about the credit union movement and what you're doing at InTouch Credit Union?
The biggest excitement is the difference that we can still make, especially on the financial education front, on the digital technology delivery front, because those have a lot of overlapping kind of possibilities. And the fact that credit unions in their totality still only have about 7 cents of every dollar in the United States deposit spectrum. 7 cents. And so we're one of like 4,500 credit unions. So we're still the best kept secret in the sauce,
Absolutely. Yep.
And so there is, as large as the industry has become, you'd still be surprised how many have never heard of credit unions, how many don't do business with credit unions, and more importantly, how many do not understand the fundamental structural differences between credit unions and banks that makes us different.
Absolutely. This was a question as I start to move forward into kind of those, like, just really picking your brain on the leadership questions portion of the podcast, because you've had a long, successful career leading, the credit union. But one thing that popped into my mind, am I right? Have you been the CEO for about 30 years?
No.
Okay. You've been credit unions 30 years.
I've been in credit unions for 30 years. I started my credit union career at the end of 91. But
okay.
No, I've been CEO of this credit union for 18 years.
Okay, so still 18 years. This was something I was thinking about, and it wasn't in the questions that I sent you, but I really wanted to go down this path a little bit. My guess is 18 years ago when you became a CEO, and I can think back to my time in the brokerage days in the business that you started in as well, many people in the room didn't look like you.
Oh, absolutely. A lot of the people in the room didn't look like me.
Absolutely. So is that something that you're willing, I guess, to talk on, is not only like getting yourself that seat at the table, but then how that has affected your career, how I guess I have a whole section I'd love to talk to you about mentoring and the mentors you've had along the way. So whether it was 18 years or if I had in my head 30 years, that was just, it was something that I wanted to make sure to touch on with you.
Well, I've had some great mentors in that time, and I've had mentors that I've tried to emulate. I've also had mentors that I wanted to make sure I did the absolute opposite of what they did.
I think we all have those people we learned what not to do from, right?
Yeah, but there's opportunities to learn from everyone. I think one of the fundamental things that happened as a part of my epiphany that led me to credit unions back in the 80s is that I did some, personal effectiveness training, leadership training, that sort of thing. And growing up as a kid in the 60s or 70s, I didn't realize I had this thought in my head. But apparently somewhere in my life, I became convinced, and I don't know how it's a whole different type of political conversation, but I became convinced, being an African American, that for some reason, if someone didn't like me, it was my fault. And so the whole idea of everything from being an example and a credit to your race, on top of making sure that everyone gets treated fairly and equally and those sorts of things and respectfully. For some reason, I took it as a burden. And throughout this leadership training, I thought, wait a minute, there could be a different answer because I think I'm a pretty nice, reasonable person. So it could be possibly that if someone didn't like me because I was a man, or if someone didn't like me because I was African American, or if someone didn't like me because I was an athlete, or someone didn't like me for whatever reason, that probably had more to do with them than it had to do with me. When I had that epiphany, I thought, okay, well, then that changed my whole attitude with respect to relationships and friendships and mentoring and opportunity. And I started realizing that once you start evaluating your circumstances through that lens, you will discover that there are all kinds of people in all races, all creeds, all colors, all genres on every side of the equation.
Can I ask, how old were you when you had that epiphany?
Probably 24.
Okay.
25.
Oh, okay. So fairly early on in your career.
Yeah. So it just changed my whole outlook. And I just thought, well, wait a minute. If that's the case, then I can choose who I'm around. I can choose my environment. I can't choose all of my circumstances, but I can choose some of it. I'm reading a great book right now by Chuck Swindoll that it's titled, I'm paraphrasing, but it's something like, life is 10% of what happens to you and 90% of how you react to it. And I'm just thinking, okay, then the opportunity that I have for me isn't written yet. And I have more input than I ever thought I did.
I love that line. The opportunity I have for me isn't written yet. That is fantastic.
And so I just thought, okay. And so at that point in time, I just start putting my nose to the grindstone. And I started working like crazy and educating myself. And I started learning from everywhere I could, anyone I could. And, something fortunate happened to me. I do think that there is a tiny bit of self-fulfilling prophecy from the standpoint of, I think about it every time the Olympics come around, or every time I see, the Super Bowl or the World Series or some sort of, you hear a lot of conversation about, well, that individual is so lucky. They were so lucky to be born with that talent. They're so lucky to be born with those abilities. But no one ever peeks behind the curtain and looks at all of the hundreds of thousands of hours that they practiced and they worked and they bled and they suffered in order to get this lucky opportunity.
To be able to capitalize on that opportunity, right? So that's awesome. Let me ask you this. If we're looking at Kent's world, who do you surround yourself with? Your network, the people that you bounce things off of. One of the things as over the past 15 years I've built CUInsight is, I've found the people in my network personally who are willing to go, what? that's a bad idea or whatever. Why would you think that? Or almost more important than the people that are like high-fiving you all the time. So like, what does your network look like? And do you have those folks who will go, what are you thinking, man?
I do have those folks, and it's only a handful. Some of them I've known since childhood. Two of my buddies I've known since Little League. But I've also have really good friends that I've met along the way in my career that I've known 20 years to 30 years, and some new ones that I've met more recently, within the last 3 or 4. But I've got a small little community that I trust them. I trust them to tell me the truth, and I do the same for them. They allow me to be human with them. I bounce things off them. They bounce things off me. Because and it's not just CEO position, but I think leadership positions, to do them well, they are very lonely positions in the org.
Gosh, I've heard so many of the CEOs who've been on the podcast and just in conversations outside of the podcast, right? Like that idea, and maybe it's one of the surprises when somebody becomes a CEO, where you suddenly go from, you have a certain spot above the organization, but then you also have a board with a whole bunch of bosses above you. And, you tend to be there. The buck does stop with you, right? So that kind of that idea that it can be lonely at the top. There's a lot of folks out there today who like listen to the podcast who would love to be sitting in a chair like yours someday, right? Like they want to be the next CEO of a credit union. Is there a piece of advice you'd have for them? Maybe they're on, an executive team right now, and that's the next step for them.
2 pieces of advice. One, be authentic. Okay. Life is too short to contort yourself, to try to perform a role that doesn't align with you or be in an organization that doesn't align with you. The best part about work, I think, is when your vocation and your avocation overlap so much that you would do it for free. You hear that and some people say, no, it's true. When you find something that you do and you love to do it, and you would do it even if they wouldn't pay you because of the contribution that you can make and the things that you can do that are important to you, that's what's most important. And so, first of all, anyone that wants to be CEO just for the title or just for the money or just for the PR, and they don't have any of those other fulfillment opportunities, they're going to struggle. And it's just like any other kind of change. To get good at something, you have to invest your energy in it. And so I tell my staff all the time, work should be a get to, not a have to. When you find yourself waking up and say, I get to go to work today, that is a totally different mindset than you wake up and you tell yourself, I have to go to work today. And so it shows up in so many different ways downstream. People think that they've got great poker faces, right?
Yeah.
But it's so transparent. It comes through in so many different ways that you can think you have a great poker face. But people are their discernment is pretty good when it comes to aligning truth and fiction.
That's one of those things as our team was building out that I was like, we might not be doing something right here, is when, if you happen, and we've probably all been in the organizations before where like it's Tuesday and people are like, is it Friday yet? And you're like, oh boy, something's wrong. we need to get this back on track. I'd like to ask you, I know you've made many investments in your career. You've mentioned quite a bit about, educating yourself. This is a question I love asking on the show. And it came from another podcast I listened to where the example they gave was what's the greatest investment that, if you can think of one of those investments you made in your career, the example they used was Warren Buffett said it was a Dale Carnegie course. So is there something that sticks out to you that you're like, I'm sure glad I did that,
Yes. In fact, the greatest investment that I made was, believe it or not, getting my MBA from Notre Dame.
Yeah.
For a couple reasons. The biggest, because there's a huge difference between a bachelor's degree and a graduate degree, just in terms of knowledge and scale and scope and understanding and that sort of thing. However, one of the things that I did not know, but was revealed to me in graduate school, is that most of it, because I didn't go to graduate school until I was in my late 30s.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And so all of the things that I had learned through experience, I had learned through hard knocks, I had learned through trial and error, et cetera, et cetera. There were calculus formulas for that could have produced that answer in like 90 seconds. There were white papers, there were experiences that could have given me the same amount of information in a fraction of the time. And so my mind just exploded with possibilities that had to do with things that I never even considered about work efficiency, about brand, about value, about return on investment, and I just thought, oh my goodness, you mean I've been doing it the hard way all this time? That there is a methodology behind it. There is a science behind it that is repeatable and provable and so forth. And so it opened my mind to such possibilities that helped me formulate the idea that, you know what? I not only can be a CEO, but I want to be a CEO to be able to share this information.
Let me ask you this, because my guess is many of the books that we grew up reading about leadership, and I'm doing air quotes, in those great CEOs, some of them seem dated at this point, right? Doesn't mean you can't still gain something from it. What do you think makes a good CEO or a leader in general today?
I think, granted, I'm probably in the minority of this, but I very much believe in servant leadership. I really believe that to be a good leader, you have to be willing to serve those above you and below you. And that is what your primary responsibility is. And so knowing that you're going to put their interest in front of your own, their financial interests, their career interests, their security interests, their knowledge interests above your own, creates a kind of synergy within an environment that produces positive results.
I agree with you there. I'm going to kind of bring this back around to something we were talking about in the beginning when, we were looking at the challenges and the opportunities that exist in credit unions. One of the I guess you could say, struggles that I had, hopefully I'm getting a little bit better at it in my career, is that idea of like kind of getting married to an idea. Like there's a lot of different ways we can go. And if we want our credit unions to stay relevant and actually thrive, jump that 7% number up, right? Like how do you make sure that you're making, when you have so many choices that you could go down that, road, that rabbit hole, that you're making not only the right choice, but if you do happen, we don't all, to use the baseball analogy, we don't all bat 1,000. So how do you make sure that, something that maybe you should have use those resources in maybe a better place 18 months in, instead of it still throwing good money after bad or good energy after bad 5 years in?
Yeah. Well, there is no science to that. There is no perfect way of being to that, because there are so many variables that you have to make in a complex system. A decision that was a wrong decision in February could be a right decision in September because of the environment. I do think it's important that you surround yourself with all sorts of points of view and not subject yourself to groupthink, right? I do think it helps to have a plan with respect to where you want to go, instead of just being a kite that's tetheredless, if that's a word, that you kind of understand where you are and how you want to get there. But other than that, I think a big responsibility for most leaders is you have to decide what your minimum thresholds are. And that differs depending upon what you're trying to accomplish. For instance, I very much believe in an idiosyncratic kind of way of being, because no two individuals are the same. And so therefore, if my job is to get the best out of you, then I have to understand what your strengths are and what you thrive with and what you don't, and kind of mirror that with the other leaders. But I also need to kind of understand how you learn, what drives you, that sort of thing. And then look for opportunities of overlap to where you can perform in that space, and it will be positive to help us get where we're going. The challenge with that, the biggest challenge with that, is that sometimes, especially from a leadership standpoint, you see things that others don't. The advantage or the challenge of being a leader is that a lot of times you're flying at 15,000 feet and everybody else is at ground level, and you can see the cliff over the hill and things of that nature. But may have some great subordinates that just insist this is the direction we need to go. So you have to decide as a leader, okay, even though I know it potentially could be hazardous, it could potentially be wrong, do I let them do that, or do I subvert their decision and tell them, no, we're going this way or that way because? And it just depends upon the importance and the challenge of it, because there are some individuals that, in my experience, if you don't give them the opportunity to learn for themselves, they will think you're holding them back. They'll think you're micromanaging them. They will think, and only by giving them the opportunity to succeed or fail, if they are successful and it's something different than you thought, well, then you learn something. But if they failed and you saw it coming, then one of the things that you have to be willing to accept is accept that failure not as a failure, but a growth opportunity. And that was the price. That was the cost. And that's very challenging for a leader to have to balance and do. In fact, it's interesting as I've done that over my career, two things that I've discovered. One, especially when my staff pursues scholarship, it's amazing how much smarter I get. Right. Wow, how'd you see that coming? It's kind of like I've always thought a great leader as having like a Bobby Fischer kind of mindset. How did you do that? How are you able to comport all those options and all those variables in such a way that you could honestly tell me that I'm going to lose in 15 minutes? Well, you've got some leaders that can only see 2 moves ahead or only 3 moves ahead. But the only way that you're going to get them to see 5 moves ahead or 7 moves ahead or make those moves, even though those moves aren't going to end up with where they want to go, it is part of the learning process.
Yeah, because then they're a better leader from it, right?
More so what accompanies that is that I've taken the position that all failures are mine and all successes are theirs.
Oh, okay.
So whatever happens,
yep.
If it doesn't work, it is my error. But if it works, I've got great team members and this is what they did. And so it kind of creates this kind of environment that it's free to learn. It's kind of like I'm trying to, now granted, I can't give someone so much rope that they would hurt themselves, they'd hurt the institution, they'd hurt what we're trying to do. But it's my responsibility within bounds to give them as much as I can in order to help them grow in their career as a leader and what they want to accomplish.
It's a beautiful thing when you can create the space that you can fail and learn from it and grow from it as well, because that's, I think, how we keep trying new things. And like you said, sometimes it may surprise you. You might have thought you saw 7 moves ahead and all of a sudden it worked, and you're like, oh, wait, different moves.
I had a couple of great mentors that let me do that.
Yeah.
And I didn't recognize it at the time that that's what they were doing, but I can see that now. And I thought, oh, wow. Okay. Well, then part of the reason why I'm here is because of what they paid forward. And so it's only my responsibility to do the same.
Gosh, I could talk to you for hours, but I want to be respectful of your time and our listeners. So we do kind of have to start to wrap this up. We're not done yet. And it wouldn't be the CUInsight Experience podcast without some having a little fun with some rapid fire questions. So
okay.
the questions are rapid, but your answers don't have to be. So okay. When was the last time, either personally or professionally, you were just amazed? Like, wow.
It happened last fall. And we had in the org, and it reminded me how important leadership was. We had a leader that was just kind of like failing, a junior leader in the org that just wasn't doing a very good job. And that particular person's leader changed. And all of a sudden, they are becoming like one of our superstars. Same person, wow. Same job. And I thought, oh my goodness, that affirms for me how important leadership and guidance and scope and responsibility is.
That's pretty awesome right there. We've seen that in CUInsight as well, as like I moved out of kind of that CEO role or leadership role and we brought in a new CEO. Some folks have thrived since Lauren, our CEO, has come on, right? That's pretty amazing to see. Is there anything that you're currently working on for yourself? It sounds like you're a lifelong learner. So what's taking up that self-growth space?
I am. In fact, part of being a CEO is that, and recognizing that you're human, is that you have to make choices. Being a lifelong learner about, it's been probably 10 years ago, maybe 11. I started on the path of pursuing my PhD in leadership and organizational change. And I was, working, 50 hours a week at the credit union and putting in 30 hours a week of study. And I had a young wife and a young son at home. And then all of a sudden we discovered that we knew it, but my son is special needs and he needed more.
Okay.
And my wife developed some physical challenges. And so I had to choose. And so I made the choice that, my responsibility to my organization and my board and my employees and my responsibility to my family was more important than what I thought I was giving to myself. So I took a long sabbatical and just postponed it. I am in the process now. My youngest is a freshman in college.
Okay. Well.
And he still struggles with organizational skills and things of that nature. And in fact, they have a new term for it because he talks to his cousins and they've all shared with me that adulting is hard.
Yeah, that's it. There you go. Yep.
Yeah. But I am hoping to rekindle that desire and finish that work and get published and expound on what it is I think I know about leadership and organizational change.
So the next time you're on, I'll be calling you doctor. So I appreciate you sharing that about the outside of work, the family side of it. And that's a question that I did want to ask you that I kind of added in the past year is, many folks when they get to the CEO level, we're go-getters, right? And that can often be at the detriment of those personal relationships. Any hacks that you've picked up along the way on how to make sure we're doing the whole thing?
The only hack that I've picked up is that there is no such thing as balance. There's a such thing as choice. And you choose. You choose how you want to invest your time. You choose how you weight your time. And because of my choices, it also gave me an opportunity to bond with my staffs in ways that I hadn't thought, because I have two sons 23 years apart.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yep.
So being a father all over again and having to go to PTA meetings and band parent association and band practices and all of those sorts of things at my stage in my career, alongside my employees that are doing it for the first time, it's like, okay, it's a balancing thing. It's a choice thing. It's an option thing. And we all only have 24 hours in a day. And so you just have to choose. But the other side of it is there is no right way, and your circumstances do change. Like I tell everyone all the time, the kind of father I need to be for my 19-year-old is different from when he was 15, is different from when he was 10, is different from when he was 5. But I'm still his father and he still needs a father. It's just up to me to show up in a different way. We kind of all have that responsibility, and to recognize that we're the same people, but our circumstances change. And so because our circumstances change and our stations in life change, that to be successful, that requires some different choices from us.
What's the greatest album of all time? That one you can listen to from front to back.
Easy. Stevie Wonder, Songs in the Key of Life, 1976.
I am a Motown guy, so I love that. That is a good one. I'm going to skip to this one. When you hear the word success, who is the first person that comes to mind and why?
Wow. Believe it or not, I know this may sound cliched, but I'd probably say Barack Obama. And the reason why is because regardless of his circumstances, at every stage of his career, he always tried to pivot to do the right thing. Whether he was accused of not being in this country or being a Muslim or being a biracial kid, he stayed authentic to his self, to what his faith was, what his professed faith was, and to what he believed, which is a track record of just putting other people's interests first. I admire that. I mean, staying away from, religion and all of that stuff. I very much admire leaders who are servant leaders and who puts their constituencies' needs above their own. I admire that greatly.
The last question I have of you, do you have any final thoughts you'd like to share with our listeners?
Well, there is one thing I wanted to talk about from a leadership standpoint, and that is when I said that leadership is a lonely place, it doesn't have to be lonely. What I mean by that is that in your organization or within your responsibility, your employees, they look to you. They look to you to set the tone. They look to you to create the environment for the day. They look for you for success. They look for you as the pinnacle, the guiding principle. Because they are looking for you to do that sort of thing, it's important that you are there for them and you deliver that for them. For instance, like if I have a bad morning, it's shame on me for taking that out on my employees. They don't deserve that. They deserve me to be their point of inspiration, so to speak. So therefore, I have a responsibility to be that for them. But I am only human. So that's the reason why I have that core set of support that's outside the organization that I think every good leader and every CEO should have. Are friends that are willing to tell you the truth and you can vent to and all of those sorts of things to be able to be a good leader. But you shouldn't look within your org for that person, because it just creates all sorts of liability in the org when you do that.
I couldn't agree with you more. That is the perfect way to wrap this show up. I thank you so much for being on the show, Ken. This was one of the episodes I could have literally just kept going for hours with you. This was a lot of fun. So thank you for being here, my friend.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
I hope our paths cross again soon. Hopefully, maybe even in person, we can have this conversation further.
I'm going to try to make it happen just so I can, after the fact that I get my advanced degree, just so you can call me doctor.
I look forward to that. I can't wait for that moment. So I appreciate you being here. If people have additional questions of you, what's your poison? Email, LinkedIn? How can they get a hold of you?
Email is the best way. CEO@itcu.org.
We will link to that in the show notes and everything else we talked about today. Thank you again for being here, my friend.
Thank you very much.
A few things before we go. Make sure to check out Q's in the show notes and learn more about and register for CEO Dialogue and be a part of that conversation. Q's has been a longtime partner of CUInsight.com and the podcast, and I am so grateful for their support to allow us to have this much fun and keep doing what we do. Please also subscribe to the CU Insight Experience on your favorite podcast player. We are on them all, and if you're looking for a book mentioned on the the show. A quick Google of the CUInsight Experience podcast book list, and your next read is on the way from Amazon. I will tell you, after we stopped recording, there was a book that Kent was telling me about, The Way of the Shepherd by Kevin Liam. We will make sure to, or Liam, I'm not sure. We'll have to look that up, but it'll be in the show notes. So if you want to check that one out. And finally, certainly last but not least, I want to thank all of you for listening today. Y'all rock, and I appreciate all the kind words that come in about the show and the feedback. We have so much fun doing this. So be well, friends. I hope to see you all soon.